All right, good morning, Doug. Today we're back with questions from members of the File. File is our private member community. Essentially, if you subscribe to the paid version of crisisinvesting.com, you get to ask questions of Doug, and we try and answer those on Friday. So, Doug, the first question for you is, he wants to know, how does the world look in 4 years, given the behavior of Trump and his administration, coupled with what's going on across the globe? We've got the Russia-Ukraine thing, the BRICS alignment, the India-Pakistan flare-up. So it certainly feels like a unique moment in history. How does it all look in November of 2028?
Well, this is writing science fiction, actually. Uh, it's a chaotic situation where almost anything is possible. Uh, I'll tell you what I think. It's that the economy, since we have a grossly overpriced bond market, and interest rates, I think, are going to be headed up radically, and an overpriced stock market, which is headed down, and a real estate market, which is floating on a sea of debt, which is not good if interest rates are going up. So here's what I'm saying. I think the economy heads down from here, and Trump's tariffs and the general adding to the chaos that he is, the economy is going down. Unemployment's going up. There's a lot of people in a lot of trouble. So I think that the Democrats are going to win the next election, looking forward 4 years, okay, which is hard to do, but that's the question. So rig for rough running.
What is besides the political changes that occur and the economy being in worse shape than it is today, what else does the world look like in 2028 compared to today? What other stark differences stand out in your science fiction version?
I think Africa is going to come to the fore. Uh, it's going to be a situs for lots of wars in the future. Just what we see going on between in Sudan, for instance, is I think the shape of things to come. And the U.S. seems to love to get involved. I mean, we have an AFRICON. We go over there and mess around in the, what is it, 55 countries we have in that united continent, which has gone nowhere, quite frankly. $2 trillion of foreign aid has flowed into it over the last generation or so, and it hasn't helped anything at all that I can tell in Africa. So it's not on anybody's radar, but I'll bet it's going to be on somebody's radar in the future. Just a miscellaneous thought on that. But what
What
else
about
is
the,
going
what about the US dollar's role in global trade? How is that different from now?
on its way out? On its way out. Nobody wants to hold a hot potato. And everybody knows, even if they've been educated in Keynesian economics, that the dollar is the unsecured liability of a bankrupt entity, which is printing up more and more of them all the time. I mean, the best efforts of Doge and the rest of this, notwithstanding that, the US government is running $1 trillion, 2 trillion, maybe $3 trillion deficits way into the future. You're not going to peddle that paper to the Chinese and the Japanese anymore. It's going to have to be bought by the Federal Reserve. And inflation is going up with the money supply. So that's my answer. Yeah, look, they painted themselves into a corner. I'm in Buenos Aires right now, and I don't have my duck painting where the ducks have painted themselves
Just
into a corner, which I think is appropriate for these interviews, but that's where they are.
Hmm. What about they've advocated this Lighthizer guy who was the trade representative in the first Trump administration, advocated for a strategic decoupling from China. It seems like the current state or certainly there's like a decoupling happening, at least currently, because of the trade spat that's kind of causing COVID-like things to occur, where supply chains are getting screwed up, how does the decoupling with China look by 2028?
Well, it would be nice if everything was manufactured in the US, and there's no reason why everything shouldn't and couldn't be manufactured in the US. I mean, it has great infrastructure, everything works, not high levels of corruption relative to other countries. It's one reason why Africa is not going anywhere. It's totally corrupt. But Trump is not going to be in a position, unfortunately, to radically reduce regulations. I mean, I'm sure he'll reduce or reduce taxes, regardless of what he's said. Very nice to hear he wants to get rid of the income tax. But how is it possible when he's spending more money, raising the military budget from 800 billion nominal to a trillion? Yeah, it's not going to work. So yeah, it'd be great if manufacturing came back to the US, and it could, but I don't think it will. And if it does, when the Democrats are elected, who knows what kind of crazy things they're going to do. But the whole world could fall apart in the next few years.
Hmm.
It's very unstable. All I see is instability anywhere, and nobody wants the dollar. I mean, that's been our major export. Nobody talks about this or understands it. Our major export for the last 40 years has been US dollars. And they are an immense liability that are going to come back home because foreigners do not have to hold US dollars. Americans do. So if since the dollar rests on nothing but confidence, and confidence can blow away like a pile of feathers in a hurricane, at some point we'll have a currency crisis. And the Trump regime will probably respond with foreign exchange controls, but all those dollars are going to want to come home to the US in exchange for real assets shipped out of the US. More dollars that have been artificially inflating our standard of living for a couple of generations are going to flow into the US. So that does not augur well for the standard of living of the average American. Rich people will do fine. You know, all those dollars being created in Washington flow first to the pockets of rich people who stand next to the fire hydrant, the spigot, can borrow things and hire lawyers to get around the regulations and accountants to. But the average American can't do any of that stuff. He's just screwed trying to save dollars, which are going to be inflated. So I don't see any way out of this, notwithstanding the good intentions of the nice people in Doge.
Right. Well, the best thing that people can do probably is just make sure they have at least some gold, right? I mean, they got to make sure they have something that isn't being inflated away in all this in the next few years.
Yeah, well, we've been telling people to buy gold coins for years and years at this point.
I know, but
And
I feel like it's still worth doing. You know, I was having a little conversation back and forth with Frank Justra the other day, and he's like, it seems like it's futile sometimes to tell people about this. And I said, yeah, but you know, if I said not everyone is a dumb lemming, you know, they just don't know. I said, you know, if Doug hadn't been out there long ago talking about gold, like I was just an ignorant person, not a lemming, and not be confused, you know. So I was just ignorant. So I heard you talking about it years and years ago, which made me interested. So my hope is that by still talking about it today, that you know they're just people who are ignorant, who just don't know, and that they are beginning to understand, hopefully, the importance of having it. So it's worth saying, I think, even though you've been saying it forever.
yeah,
And Frank said Doug was the first, the one, the big one that was pushing this. He gave you
ah,
the
well, that's sweet of Frank. And Frank and I have a mutual admiration society, I've got to say. So it's,
understandable.
yeah, it's great. Anyway, it's good karma. I mean, to help as many people that can try to see what's going on to save themselves. That's
It's the best you can do. Yep. Okay, next question is there any potential benefit or risk to buying shares on different exchanges if they're listed on several? So I was thinking perhaps with currency controls might affect it going forward, or even if changes of exchanges or chances of exchanges going bankrupt. You know, because like a lot of these small mining stocks in Canada, they do have a US OTC stock. Is there any downside that you can see, or is there any protection in being in, you know, because let's say the relationship gets worse between the US and Canada somehow, you know, would you, as an American, would it be an advantage to own the OTC version? Or I don't know. The guy says,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a stupid question, but honestly, I don't know the answer to the question either. So what do you think?
Well, probably most of these small Canadian mining stocks, resource stocks, not just mining, are also traded OTC in the US. But it's generally to your advantage, if you can, to buy them in Canada. Why? Because you don't have the exchange from US dollars to Canadian dollars, and then when you sell it, and the market is more liquid in Canada, and the commissions, well, they could be higher or lower, but the costs are cheaper on the original exchange. But the problem is this, is that an American really can't set up an account in Canada. You can set up an account with a Canadian broker, but they're going to kick it down to an American associate. So you don't really have an account with Canaccord or Haywood or any of the other big brokers up there. Too bad. I mean, that's a change that has been made in recent times. But you want to have money outside of the US, especially when we get foreign exchange controls in the future, which I think is very likely. Uh, Money outside the US is going to be worth more than money inside the US, much more convenient for you. You're not going to be trapped like in a lobster trap or, God forbid, a roach motel. So the answer to the question is it's going to be tough for you to open up a Canadian or any other kind of brokerage account, a legitimate one at this point. They don't want American business, on and on. But if you can, and you should try to get money outside of the country, do it.
Okay. All right. Doug, do you have any insight into foreign government influences in the US and Canada, like Qatar, China, for instance, in universities, schools, land, real estate, local or federal government agencies? Or would you attribute the changes, the decline we see in institutions and society of US and Canada purely to domestic social evolution or devolution? I guess because, you know, one of the things that people say is like, uh, it's like a legacy of the communist influence in American institutions, or that China or Qatar, you know, that they're funding these institutions to encourage anti-American thought, you know, or even encouraging the policies set up by the DHS, where they're financing, where Mayorkas is financing, you know, the invasion of America by, I mean, how much of it, of the collapse of America, or the degradation at least, would you think is attributed to foreign government influence?
Well, I guess uh, Arab countries, countries that are dominated by Mohammedanism, uh, want to build a coterie of American professors that will present in courses Islam in a good light, and that's apparently going on. You know, if the Qataris make, you know, send some university $1 million or 10 million or however many dollars, they can say, we'd like you to use it to set up a chair in Islamic studies or something like that. So I'm sure that goes on. But the major foreign influence on American policy is not coming from them, from the Islamic world. It's coming from Israel, frankly. And but the flow is
The
from
other way.
the US from to Israel, not from Israel to the US, whereas the Arabs are sending money here, we're sending money to the Israelis. Uh, I mean, it was a revelation for Trump to find, as he mentioned to Netanyahu, that we send them $4 billion per year. So let me see. There's about 4 million Jews in Israel. 4 billion into that's like 4 billion into 4 million. That's about $1,000 per Jewish citizen of Israel. That's a lot. You got $1,000. I mean, every American would love to have $1,000 wander in from some foreign country. That'd be great. But and of course, not to mention, and of course, this is something you're not supposed to point out or say. It's that, you know, Jews, nothing against Jews. I have many Jewish friends. I'm on a Zoom call every week, every other week, I should say, with where I'm about the only goyim on the call. So I'm reasonably well wired in the Jewish community. Uh, I'm not a Jew, but in fact, I feel like an honorary member of the tribe, frankly. But let me just say that Israel really controls the U.S. Now, sometimes it's like it's like a bad-tempered man with a vicious dog. Uh, and who's Israel and who's the U.S.? Who's the bad-tempered man? Who's the vicious dog? You can't tell between the two of them which it is because they're both making trouble everywhere. But yeah, Israel really controls huge amounts of the American experiment at this point. I mean, look at Trump's cabinet. Everybody's Jewish,
Or
frankly.
at least pro Israel. Yeah.
At
At least
least
pro.
pro-Israel, right? And of course, you have to draw a distinction here between, you know, ordinary Jews and Zionists and Orthodox and cultural and all
But no
this
one
type.
likes anything complicated, Doug. Everyone wants it to be black and white, right? They want you to say this is good and that is bad, and these people are good guys and these people are bad guys, right? They always want it so it's made so simple, which it's not.
Yeah. The answer to the question is to get the US government as an entity out of everywhere, absolutely, including the Middle East. And incidentally, cut off 100% of foreign aid to foreign countries, which I don't know what the number currently is. It's about $50 billion per year, but that's not counting military aid and military loans because the US produces, the number I've seen is 70% of the world's armaments at this point. So it's a big business, and these weapons companies lobby congressmen to give away weapons to favored countries or loan money so they can buy their weapons. And both sides of wars are using U.S. armaments. It's all crazy. The U.S. government is the real problem. But no, and Israel shouldn't get 4 billion. And Egypt is the second biggest recipient. They get 4 billion too. Now, why is that? Well, it's it's to buy their friendship for Israel. Well, I guess that's the answer to the question is that you've got to cut back the size of the government radically and not give away any money to foreign countries. If Americans want to shower Israel with billions of dollars, that's fine. It's their money, but not the US government.
Right. All right. It's a question from it's a late 40s female in Canada looking to leave, potentially going to Paraguay. They only have an RRSP, I guess, which is like a IRA or a 401k kind of thing, I guess. Says lost everything else, and there says they're not keen on keeping their RRSP savings in a Canadian bank. Looking to gold or silver, but worried as they hold physical and I can't access it. So anyway, her question is basically she's wondering if she should just take out the value of whatever's there and just go ahead and get taxed on it.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. It's that, so how old is she? Did she mention
It's
that?
just late 40s.
Okay, so here we have a middle-aged woman who, it sounds like all of her assets are, what was it, 70,000 Canadian dollars in an RSP, which is about 50,000 US. And if you withdraw the money from it, I don't know what the degree of Canadian taxes are, but it's got to be something. So if you're going to move to Paraguay with, let's say you wind up with one thing and another, 30 grand US, uh, what are you going to do there? You're going to have to speak good Spanish in order. It's going to be expensive. I don't know. You're not going to get a job with anything in Paraguay. You got to set up a business. But in order to do that, it's tough. I mean, she's in a tough situation.
Really tough situation. Let me ask it more generally. If you've got, like I have money in an IRA and I've considered, should I just, knowing that and it's limited in what I can invest in, right? In that. So is it worth me, or actually, no, an IRA is okay, but the 401k that I have is limited in what I can invest in. And like I can't take physical metals, for instance. I can buy securities in it. I can go gold stocks in it, stuff like that. But at what point does it make sense? Because the whole thing, they're supposed to be tax advantaged, but those tax laws could change. I know a lot of people have considered this idea of just taking that capital out of it, paying the tax, just be done with it, and then to buy real assets like physical gold or or something they can keep in their possession during these times where it seems like the whole economic system is being reordered. I mean, you have a situation in Argentina, right, where everyone's pensions like, okay, now you own, Argentine bonds, I mean, there is a real risk of something like that, and it's a huge trade-off. You're kind of lured into these vehicles to save money on taxes, but like when the musical chairs, the music stops, and you're in these programs, who knows what could happen with it?
Yeah, well, uh, I've got part of the assets in my retirement plans are overseas, perfectly legal. You can do it. I've got to talk to somebody that knows the ins and outs of tax law. But like I bought an office building in Punta del Este, and it's appreciated, and throws off income, and the income goes into my IRA or KEO. I don't know,
Yeah, self-directed IRA. Yeah.
whatever it is. Set it up, and it's tax free. So I feel good insofar as that money's outside of the country, and I'm somewhat insulated from coming foreign exchange controls. But
Hmm.
look, the key is to earn more money. That's the key. Think, I guess, are most people that are listening to us now employees? Probably. Most people are employees. I think that you should look for some type of an entrepreneurial business. Find some good or service that the market wants where there's a void in the market that you can fill. And you don't want to be somebody else's employee. You have much more flexibility being an entrepreneur, preferably with an international tinge to your entrepreneurial activities. That's my answer, basically. Earn more money. Earn more money is the answer, always.
Yeah.
Easier said than done, obviously.
It is easier said than done. But there are things that you could do if you start thinking about it that way. It's like, hey, I need to generate more income. What can I do? What could I do? What good could I do around me that people would be willing to pay for?
Yeah, it's too bad they don't have yellow pages anymore because they were so convenient. You could page through and look at all the businesses. Everybody advertising the yellow pages was looking for more business. And you can still do it on computer, I guess, but I don't think it's quite as easy. Uh, and figure out what skills do I have that I can offer to this guy putting an ad in here looking for business. I mean, I think that's a great way to start, quite educational too. Looking what businesses are there in my local area. Nobody even thinks about that stuff. And what
And
skills and abilities do I have? Most people don't have enough, frankly. They haven't prepared themselves properly.
that's absolutely true. Yep. Okay, what do you think of the World Bank's assessment that commodity prices are set to fall sharply this year? And he, points to this long World Bank document.
Well, look, I don't trust anything or frankly pay any attention to anything that comes out of the World Bank or the OECD or the IMF or any of these stupid organizations, all of which should be abolished. They're all wasting capital. And their reports, I've seen a lot of their reports, are just worthless. They're academic guesswork is all it is. And so
I,
this
yeah,
report is the World Bank says commodity prices are going down.
by 12% this year is what it said.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's good to know. There's an exact number attached to what's going to happen. Well, look, the last peak in commodity prices, and it was quite a peak, was back in 2011 or something like that. And since then, the average grain, soybeans, wheat, corn, it's fallen about 50%. Okay. So, and uh, I don't think they're going to go much lower from here, quite frankly. I mean, after a grain has gone down 50%, is and look, anything can happen, but don't follow the predictions of these people. They're not,
They're just, they're basically, that whenever you're coming up with these models about trying to predict the future, any of these financial models, you have to make a set of assumptions. And those assumptions are always based upon the reasonable past. So they don't include anything that might change in the environment. And I think we live in an environment that's changing radically. And I asked AI to go check. It said, get the reports for the last 5 years and how do they do on their forecasts. And just for the record, their forecast error on energy is 18% in the last 5 years. Metals and minerals is 15%, agriculture 17%, 11% off in beverages, and 12% off in precious metals. That's in the last 5 years. So it's not exactly like they stick the landing in their reports.
yeah. And so much of this has to do with how much money is being created by the governments of all these countries and where are they going to dump the money? And it's, and when we're talking about metals, for instance, it's where's the price of copper and nickel? Where are they going to go? Well, if you want to build a big copper mine, assuming you have already found the deposit, it's going to take billions of dollars and probably 10 years to get into production. So you want to predict the price of copper 10 years from now with all of that, maybe usage is going to go way up, but how can supply go? This is very complex, and economic reports from these organizations I'd say they're not even interesting because they're boring to read and they are worthless. I don't know if that's an answer or not. That's just my opinion from having looked at any number of them.
Well, and like I said, they've been off. It's never in any year have they gotten it right exactly on any of these, and they're usually greater than a 10% off from their numbers. So
Well, obviously they need to hire more PhD economists to
that's the
crunch
problem.
more, which I'm sure they're going to do anyway.
They just had a bigger budget. I think they could get it right. Yeah.
That's all they need is a bigger budget. That's right.
Uh, Next question. Luxury brands and very expensive handbags, watches, and cars and clothes, things that like show off that you're wealthy, that have been like kind of status symbols for the last several years. They wonder, especially as your earlier question was about how things look in November of 2028. As things are changing, could things change so that you go from being rich and cool by having these things to looking stupid and it being dangerous?
Yeah, I think so. We've seen Teslas being keyed and damaged in other ways. Uh, and a lot of this is because of resentment. And there's actually good reason, because of the highly politicized nature of the economy today, to be resentful about rich people because, frankly, a lot of the wealth, I hate to say this, the rich people have gotten is because of their political savvy and political connections. So advertising your wealth, I don't think is very smart to drive an exotic car and wear a 10,000 or I don't know what Rolexes cost these days, $20,000 Rolex to
And those are
clunky
cheap
watch,
watches. There are a lot of watches that are way more expensive than that.
way more expensive than that. I mean, in you go to Rio de Janeiro, and if you're wearing your expensive watch and your hand is hanging out the window, it might be cut off with a machete because I hate that rich person, but I want his watch. So no, and the recent scandal, which collapsed the stock of uh,
Oh,
LVH, what is it? Louis Vuitton, that big luxury company, LVH,
LVHMA? No,
something like that.
HM.
I don't own it. It was down 25%, like overnight. Why? Because it came out that the handbags that they peddle for $38,000 is the number that was listed, cost them about $1,000 to make in China. Talk about a big markup, okay? Uh, but they're peddled as French or Italian haute couture because some final stitching is done in France or Italy or whatever, but it's cheap Chinese stuff, well, quality Chinese stuff, but made cheaply. So it's a scam. It's a scam. I mean, look, you pay $100 for a tie, which, well, people aren't wearing ties so much anymore, but you can easily pay $100 for a tie. And those ties are made in the Orient for five, maybe $10 a piece, tops. It's a scam. And showing off like that makes no sense at all in a society which is heading towards class warfare, which much of the world is, with this bifurcation of rich and poor.
Yeah,
Bad
and the,
idea.
and the resentment. The resentment is the key to all of it. As soon as it become resentful, as soon as I mean, I think in America for a long time, everyone thought they they didn't they liked rich people. They liked the idea of rich people because they all believe that Americans, I think inherently, that's why I felt growing up poor, I could become rich. So why would I resent rich people? But I think as it as things have changed, I think that resentment has grown quite a bit, and it could get dangerous.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to feel betrayed. People that, for instance, have deeply indebted themselves to get a college education, and they find out that they didn't learn anything, and it's basically a worthless piece of paper, but they're still in debt. Now that they feel scammed and they're resentful.
Right, and Trump, finally reversed a bunch of the Biden era stuff so that the people who were told, convinced that they were not going to have to pay back their student loans, they'd all been now sent to collections, and so they can garnish their wages, they can levy their bank accounts, and so yeah, that's going to be a painful wake up call for people who thought they might get out of it somehow.
Yeah, and Trump did the right thing because why should the stupid misallocation of funds on the part of somebody that went to a stupid college, why should that be the liability of the average taxpayer who didn't go to college?
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Next question. Person says they're currently reading. I can't talk today. They're currently reading Speculator, which is the first in your series of 3 novels that are done now, and the fourth is on the way. They say, I'm captivated by the storyline. I wasn't expecting it to be so entertaining. I'm wondering how writing with John Hunt works. Does Doug set up the storyline? How are characters like Charles Knight and his uncle Maurice developed? There's a funny story about manufacturing a fake passport with a butcher's stamp and scrawled signature and actually using that passport successfully. Is that a true story from Doug's adventures?
Hmm. Two questions, I guess. One is, what's the process of writing the novels with John? Well, John is a very smart, knowledgeable, innovative guy with many, many virtues. And when we undertook to write those novels together, I basically put together the overreaching storyline over the 7 novels, 3 of which have been done, 4. And John filled in the characters and basically put the novels together. And then he passes it back to me, and I add in all kinds of stuff. Like, for instance, you mentioned the thing with passports, and like with the using the stamp from a
A
butcher
butcher.
shop, yeah, where they stamp meat. Well, actually, that worked out, was helpful for me because I traveled when it was possible, and it used to be possible, on a World Service Authority passport to a half a dozen countries where it worked, and another half a dozen countries where it didn't work, which was really much more interesting. And in order to make it look official and used, it's always good to have some stamps and some scribbling. These government officials, it's not theirs, but somebody else accepted it. And a World Service Authority passport used to be a very usable international travel document. So yeah, that's a real life anecdote. And and the
That's amazing.
story about using that document in like 10 countries, it's actually, they're actually fun stories. But yeah, so anyway, the novels, yeah, it's John and I worked on these things 50-50 together, and I think they're really good products.
Where'd the Uncle Maurice character come from?
Well, that actually came from a third party that before John and I hooked up, that I was working with to help me co-write the novels because, I've got to admit, I'm not as well disciplined as I once was or as I should be. So I said, I need somebody to, you know, so that was somebody that, and John adopted Uncle Maurice.
Yeah, I think it works well though. Helps. It's an important role in this in the novel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're good novels. I suggest listeners, if you haven't already done so, go onto Amazon and pick up Speculator to start with. I think you'll be entertained and frankly educated. There's a lot of good information in that novel,
There's a lot of good.
and the other
It's,
two also,
yeah,
Drug Lord and Assassin.
they're all very good. I enjoyed them all, and I haven't heard anybody say a bad thing about them, to be honest. So if you're looking for some good novels that are will plant healthy mind viruses in your brain, I think these are good ones.
Yeah, and if you have a kid who's wondering what to do with his life, he could do worse than follow the pathway of Charles Knight, the novel's hero.
Definitely. So next question is about this guy named Jerry Marzinski. So he's produced compelling evidence suggesting that the voices that schizophrenic people hear in their heads are actually distinct entities, and that the negative voices we all hear in our minds are from the same. He asks if you or I are familiar with the work of Jerry Marzinski, and what are the first impressions of on this topic. Well, do you hear negative voices in your head?
Well, everybody's imagination wanders around, and yeah, usually at night. So is that when I guess typically that's when the incubus or the succubus would latch onto you in medieval times, uh, and perhaps a devil or an angel would
Mm.
one would sit on one shoulder as another and whisper in your ear. I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, I know you haven't heard about this Jerry Marsitsky before, but he's done a bunch of work with the schizophrenic people, and he does make a pretty compelling case that those, I'm not sure about negative voices in your own head, but what these people experience. He has an interesting take. So I'll see if I
So
can find
does he
it.
say there are entities that are attacking your brain or your psyche?
Your psyche, yeah, essentially, yeah, encouraging you to do things that that are harmful to yourself, that are destructive to your life, that are
I mean, real entities like angels or devils.
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's his theory.
Well, I don't know. I don't have any personal reality on that, so I can't speak to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Okay. Let's see. The people rarely learn the truth. Having listened to the recent discussion with Michael Yan, I'm reminded of a quote from George Orwell. Quote, "It's not a war of countries against other countries. It is a war of the government on the minds of their own people." Doug, what are your thoughts on this quote? And can either of you think of any wars where this was not the case?
Oh, that's a hell of a good quote from Orwell. Uh, and my view is that the real enemy in the world is not, he's right. It's not one government fighting another. It's basically the people that control the government fighting against their citizens. And their citizens should fight against their governments, which are like predators that are rounding up and cutting individuals out from the herd constantly. So the enemy is the state. Now, that may or may not be exactly what Orwell said, but that's what I think anyway. First of all, you have to know who the enemy is before you can fight him. And as far as I'm concerned, the enemy isn't who somebody else tells me the enemy is. I see the enemy as being the institution of the state itself. And they're always fighting against each other, which he points out, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to think that the Chinese government, for instance, is my enemy when it's not the Chinese government that takes half of my income.
No, 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 it's not. That's that's right. Well, it's like my favorite quote from Muhammad Ali, and I was a big fan of Muhammad Ali, is he said, oh, when they tried to draft him and he said he wasn't going, he says, I ain't going to Vietnam to fight no Viet Cong. No Viet Cong ever called me nigger. So yeah.
We knew they weren't not his enemy. Yep.
Oh, exactly.
All right. Doug, do you think if the founding fathers lived in a world with today's technology, cell phone, location tracking, etc., would they have been successful in pulling off the revolution?
Absolutely. I mean, look at Benjamin Franklin. I mean, he was a technological innovator, kind of a genius in many fields. In fact, all of the founding fathers, I think I'm correct in saying all, they were all either farmers or merchants or traders. They were independent businessmen of one type or another. They weren't employees. They weren't desk jockeys. They weren't, yeah. So they'd be just as successful, and they were all rich guys, incidentally. They'd be just as successful today as they were back then.
Even though that, like, I think the question relates to like if with all the surveillance tech where, they can supposedly know what's going on all the time. I think that's the idea. But I suppose those guys would know how to leverage the technology to their advantage.
I think they would. Absolutely. They were smart, entrepreneurial guys, and they did very well in the late 18th century. They do great in the early 21st century. If they'd lived in the 10th century, they probably would have done equally well, those personalities,
Okay.
but not as well. In fact, smart people do well in high-tech environments. So would they have done as well in the 10th century, the end of the Dark Ages? I don't think so,
Mm.
because it would have had to, it was an agricultural society where you were either a warrior or a peasant. A lot less scope for advancing and creating then than in the,
So essentially, technology tools benefit everybody, really. I mean, the productivity of people, but they're huge leverage for the more intelligent, more like ambitious type of person, right?
yeah. And the more intelligent and ambitious type of person can do better where he's got more tools to use.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, next question is, do you ever see America returning to the precepts of natural law, social civility, and community support building?
Um, I think only after there's a huge upset and the political, because politics are the enemy of all these things. And it's got to be, we need a reset, to use the World Economic Forum term. And we're going to get one probably when several states or other entities break off from the US and the map is redrawn. And, you know, I mean, when that happens, the kind of people that move to Idaho or what would be another example of a state where, well, to some degree, Texas are going to be different than the kind of people that, move to or live in California or Massachusetts. And that, so yeah, the answer to the question is yeah, sure, it's possible, but only after the current entity called the US breaks up, which it absolutely will eventually.
Okay. Uh, let's see. Well, someone says, is using a self-directed IRA a good solution to invest retirement savings in real estate outside of the US? You already answered that question because you used your own case
Yeah.
with, so okay. Let's see. If Doug was going to buy Buenos Aires real estate today and he wanted to optimize for preservation of capital rather than upside potential, which neighborhood in BA would you choose?
Well, it's a big city with 10 million people or more, actually. So I'm not familiar with all of it. But the parts that I am familiar with, it seems to me, are the best parts of town to be in, namely the Recoleta, which is the traditional rich guys part of town. And I think it'll stay that way. And the other part is Palermo, which is where all the hip young people go and has a lot more restaurants and fun joints and bars and that than the Recoleta does. So those are the two areas I'd go to. And I think I'd choose the Recoleta between the two of them, even though it's not currently as hip and trendy. But and there's a lot of old people in the Recoleta because you got to be rich, and old people tend to be rich. But when they die, they're going to give these beautiful apartments to their progeny, and the progeny will be of an age when they want to move away from the noisy bars to really nice, big, high-ceilinged apartments. So those are the two places I'd go to.
Okay. Let's see. Um, Doug, have you ever thought about creating your own bank or credit union? It says credit unions have less regulations and much less minimal capital requirements. I know Rick Rule is doing this, and Doug has spoke of the difficulty in getting a bank account, and he says he can testify to that difficulty himself. Have you ever thought of setting up your own bank or credit union?
Oh, years ago, I thought about getting involved in a Swiss bank, or in Switzerland, they had, when they still have it today, I'm not sure, a financial institution that's like one step below a bank on the way to becoming a bank. Um, And I know that Peter Schiff got involved in offshore banks and all this type of thing. And my understanding is they made his life miserable. I mean, the US government hates small offshore banks. So, you know, if you want to make that your life's work, okay, but too much brain damage for my taste. And incidentally, Rick's Bank with Frank Trotter, both of them are very old friends of mine. Yeah, I invested in that. How many years ago? 7 or 8? I don't know, a long time. Do you know how long ago they were raising
Only
money?
been 4 or 5, I think,
Four
only,
or
but
five, yeah. And they still haven't gotten the damn thing I don't think. I mean,
not yet. Seems like it's close though. I mean, sincerely, it seems close because they
yeah, but
bought. Yeah,
it's been a long wait, and Rick put up most of the money for it. And I think he's had to throw more money into the kitty because the delays and the legal fees are just insane.
I mean, getting into a highly regulated business is a it's expensive and not for most people to even. I mean, Frank, they did it because Frank Trotter had done it before, right? With the
Yeah,
Everbank. It's like it was
very
like
successful.
they
Yeah,
were like rinsing and repeating, so it should be easy.
you would have thought so. Yeah, but I guess it wasn't. It's not like the good old days of the 18th century where one of the reasons I kind of like Deadwood is that it showed that there was no bank in Deadwood, but the lady, whatever her name was, that owned the gold strike there, I guess it was the start of the Homestake mine. You know, she had assets. A bank was needed. She set one up. People trusted her. They knew she was rich, appeared to be, that's banks should be easy to, it's just a business for, it's like Allied Van and Storage. Allied will store your furniture for you. A bank will store your money for you. Okay, pretty simple.
Yep, shouldn't be that hard.
Shouldn't be,
Okay,
no.
two more questions for you, Doug. Looking for your thoughts on whether maternal instincts for safety have been weaponized in recent years. When they wanted women to smoke, they used equality to sell them.
Hmm. Yeah, there's really been a inter kind of a class warfare thing that's developed between the sexes where women have been told that men are their oppressors, and it really has changed the dynamic between large segments of men and women, where men have, are retreating to becoming so-called incels, and it's yeah, been a lot of changes in the relation between the sexes in the last several generations, and not for the better.
Yeah, and as women, they're I think they have grown to these roles and with a lot more power politically or whatever. And I think that what he's getting at is that their natural instinct is for more safety, for things to be less dangerous or whatever. And so then, so maybe then that influences the policies that come in. Maybe more maternal instincts, for example, if you have vagrants in the street doing drugs, and they're like, well, you can't, we need to help these people. We don't need to punish them, you know. But so maybe I guess that's what he means. If that has that been weaponized in that way?
Oh yeah, I think that's right. Of course, I don't particularly want to punish them or help them. I just want them to go away
No
and do the,
way.
you know,
Right.
elsewhere. Uh, but yeah, I think that's quite correct. And there really are differences between men and women are more safety oriented and home oriented and security oriented, and yeah, a lot of difference between men and women.
Okay. Last question. This guy says, I have trust issues. Can I trust that SWP Cayman? Can I trust them to hold my physical gold or ship to me from Canada or ship from Canada to Grand Cayman and hold it there? I think it's a question. Any institution that holds your gold, really, rather, I mean, you could talk about SWP Cayman in particular, but just in general.
Yeah, well, I personally have an account with SWP Cayman, so I trust them. If you really have a trust issue, then perhaps you want to get on a plane and fly to Cayman. It's a delightful place, worth going to, worth seeing. Check out their facilities and meet the management. So that might be the
There,
best answer. I trust them, but don't take
yeah,
my word for it.
yeah, I trust them too. I have an account there. And by the way, if you set up an account there and you mentioned Doug and I, we get a little kickback. It's not much, but we get something. But that's not why you should trust it either. The best thing is this is like a due diligence question, right? You got to
Yeah,
do your own due diligence. So you have to do what is necessary to make you feel comfortable with it. And if that means go in there, seeing the facility, which I know people who have, but sitting down across from the people who run the place and going, is this a person I can trust? Because ultimately that's what it comes down to, right? Do we trust these people?
I trust them more than I trust Citibank or like that. Put it that way.
Yeah, Citibank is a no, is a like not even a human. It's like you can't even talk to a human. So that hurts.
No, no, I don't. I'm not sure you can actually talk to another warm body at Citibank. I guess it's possible, but
Not that
I'm
has
not
any
sure
power,
how to
probably
do it.
though. You
Huh?
know, not that has any power unless you're a huge customer. You can be
Right.
talking to somebody who can basically say, we can't do that, or no, they can follow policies, but they can't.
Yeah, or that's right. They don't care who you are or know who you are, really. And if you ask them any real question, the teller is going to have to say, I have to talk to my supervisor, and the supervisor will, it's a headless horseman. So no, I trust SWP more than I trust Citibank, and it's a good excuse to fly down, especially now in the northern. Well, let me see. We're in May, so the northern winter's over, but doesn't matter. Fly down to the Caymans. Delightful place. It's an excuse to go down there.
Yep. You got to do your own due diligence on stuff. You just don't take people's words for anything. I think, honestly, if you're putting a lot of your wealth somewhere, you want to make sure you know who you're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah, and of course you can be wrong. It doesn't matter what you do, but yeah, jump through that hoop. You'll be glad you did.
Okay. All right. I think that's it for today, Doug. We'll wrap it up. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we'll be back next week with more.
Well, I'll be hard at work doing my part of this book that we hopefully will have out in the next month or 2 months called The Preparation. So can't wait to get it done.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing the most recent version, Doug. So send it to me when it's ready.
I will, hopefully. All right, Matt, thanks.
Thanks. Bye bye.